On PM Express tonight, a special conversation with a man who has seen it all when it comes to media and communications. Is part of our Defend Media Freedom campaign, and I'm sure you've heard many voices in the last 2 weeks speaking about the Defend Media Freedom campaign. It's time to talk to Professor Kwame Karikari, who I'm sure you know has played a central role in this fight. He's a man behind the Media Foundation for West Africa. Back in the day, I used to read the Zongo Giwa. I don't know whether it's still there, but the Media Foundation West Africa has pushed the frontiers when it comes to media freedom, not only in Ghana, but in the sub-region, and I dare say across the continent. And in the last few months, we've seen the catalog of cases that the Media Foundation for West Africa had presented, the number of journalists assaulted. Thankfully, he also is on the board of the Graphic as a board chair. Just a couple of days back, a worker there was again assaulted. And this is all part of a conversation we've been having, at least to create awareness that journalists shouldn't be assaulted because they're doing their jobs. Today we'll have a conversation with him, pick his thoughts about the media freedom landscape and what we can do about it. He has some very interesting thoughts on this particular subject, seeing his expertise and experience in this particular area. Prof, thank you very much for your time here on PM Express.
You're very
grateful
welcome.
that you could join me. What does Prof do nowadays?
I'm a teacher. I've always been a teacher, and I'm a teacher at Wisconsin International University College here in Accra on the Atomic Road. I'm the Dean of the School of Communication Studies. I was hired here by the school's owners to try and set up this school. I've been here for the past 3 years, and I think we are making a lot of progress.
And I've seen they have a studio here that sort of replicates what you see in a professional media organization. And the purpose of that is to
train our journalists, our students, so that they will learn both the theory, and by the time they graduate out of here and they go into the job market, they will have been trained to have a practical understanding and an application of what they learned here, so that they can easily fit into the market. If, for instance, you employed somebody from Wisconsin to Joy FM or Joy TV, you will find out that it will not take too much for this student to fit into your scheme of things.
It's interesting that we still have this huge interest in communication studies, journalism, etc. in a country where in the last 1 year we've all been saddened by the developments in this particular industry. Graphic Communications spoke to you this year in May when we're doing the Press Freedom Day as saying that the press freedom was in recession and might soon go into extinction if practical measures are not taken to check the situation. I mean, I wonder whether your students are aware of the landscape now and the threats and the challenges that this landscape poses.
Well, as far as students are concerned who have the ambition to become journalists, there are two sources of issues or problems they must be aware of, and that we make them aware of. One, the shrinking market for journalists, because the business is very difficult.
True.
This economy is not growing or developing enough to sustain the media industry, because the media industry survives on advertising mainly, and that industry, the advertising industry, is shrinking. I'm sure your authorities will bear me out. So that is a major problem, because then employment opportunities are not as they were about, say, 10 years ago. The other problem is what you have raised, that is press freedom, threats to press freedom in this country and under President Akufo-Addo. It's a very sad case.
Why do you say that?
No, as an individual citizen, when I say it is sad that press freedom is under recession under Akufo-Addo, I'm saying this because he's a man I have always respected in this terrain, in the terrain of human rights, in rule of law, in good governance, and so on. Now, under his administration, we are seeing a number of incidents that are not very happy, that do not conform to or do not show that under such a man, these things would be a thing of the past. Let's remember that he's played some very critical roles in press freedom. I remember that about 1992 or 1993, when we were struggling for press freedom, when we were working for the freedom of Kweku Bako, Haruna Atta, and others who were being incarcerated left and right, we set up an organization called Friends of Freedom of Expression.
Okay.
And Nana Akufo-Addo, then in opposition at the time in the 1990s when Professor Edubuahin was the head of the MPP, Akufo-Addo was a very active member of this advocacy organization made up of journalists, academics, and so on and so forth. Now, he's also been the main proponent as Attorney General in the legislation to reform or repeal the criminal libel and seditious libel laws. Now, as president, he's also done the remarkable job of getting the right to information law passed when all previous governments or previous regimes had poo-pooed it and had not really cared much about it. So I still believe that this man believes in press freedom. He believes in human rights, both in public and in private. And I have had the opportunity, when he was in opposition, to have had some occasion to talk to him about these matters. And I do know that both his private sentiments and his public expressions have been the same. There have not been any contradiction in that. So under his government, if we are seeing, for instance, journalists mounting a campaign for press freedom, then we ought to sit back and reflect. But also not just sit back and reflect. Call him as president to say that he shouldn't keep silent. He must come out boldly and make a statement, reinforce the statements he's been making all his life about these freedoms. Because as president, if he came back on air, addressed the nation, recognizing that there are these problems, I think that it will help all of us.
You've made this call in the past before that you expect the president to speak. He hasn't taken that opportunity. And we've seen other events post the call you've made, and others have made so, same call, that seem to suggest that recently, the more recent cases, as a journalist or in their own stables of graphic who have been assaulted, but it talks about the state's own role. The modern Ghana incident, where, first of all, the allegation is that, well, now it's proving the state agencies called and says, pull down a story, the editors obliged. The next thing they noticed, their offices are raided, they are arrested and kept for 48 hours and let go, and then allegations emerge of people being tortured. Yeah. You'd never think that a story like that would happen. I mean, forget about Nana Akufo-Addo, but in a country like Ghana, which is celebrated across the world as one of the doyens of press freedom. Yeah.
But that's precisely the point, that we shouldn't take our rights for granted. You see, for the past 20 or so years, we've been touted all over the world, around Africa. We go with our shoulders high, our chest up, oh, we have freedom of press, and so on and so on. All of what is happening tell us that we should not be complacent, and we should continually fight for these rights.
Have we been complacent, you think?
I won't say.
But the kind of fight, and the fight, that effort you put in, and you and your generation
different actors, yes.
We don't see the same here.
Because
the unity you have, we don't have.
No, because for many years now, there was no need for a certain level of advocacy, of activism, because it was here. We were using it, and therefore there was no real need. I mean, take this Fourth Republic. Apart from Rawlins's time as president in the Fourth Republic, when press freedom was really endangered. Under Kufuor, under Atta Mills, under John Mahama, we've had a honeymoon. There hadn't been any major issues. The normal, or let's say the day-to-day things that happen against journalists have been mostly, and most of the time, the police.
Yeah.
You know, assaulting people left and right, seizing cameras, and, you know, behaving ignorantly. There have been, of course, since the Fourth Republic, a number of non-state actors who have also come into the terrain to create problems for journalists. One, and that's not really surprising, criminals.
Yes.
Regular criminals like drug, pushers, who, when they appear before court, try and assault journalists who want to take their images and so on. Then, what is also very curious, latterly, and over the period, are what I'll call these Jesus exploitation churches.
The churches.
I'm talking about these one-man churches, these Jesus exploitation churches. We've seen some so-called pastors go into studios with all manner of gadgets to attack journalists. We've seen other activities.
Journalists going to a church to do the work and assaulted.
Like what has happened in the last week or so. Those are very curious or very new developments. But I suppose under democracy, all kinds of people have the freedom to express themselves, both in the good and bad directions. However, some of the developments under this particular government make us quite frightened. Okay. Because some of them are very new in our politics, like the assassination of Anas's second-hand man. No. It doesn't happen in this country. In the past, journalists who have died in the hands of the state, in prison and so on and so forth, but not somebody going and shooting somebody who's been trying to expose
corruption, etc.
Yes. Then the case of Manasseh, your own former colleague, who was being chased around by criminals to murder. The CID know about it. The National Security also have been informed properly. Up to today, Manasseh works with a police escort. But again, there are new elements in this business. That is, commercial or business entities who appear to have joined the fray of doing things that are not very good for press freedom. And some of them, sadly, even use other journalists to hound people like Manasseh and so on. You know, so we are seeing some of these kinds of things emerging, and it doesn't do us good. Now, when you talk about the assault by national security people on those modern Ghana people, that raises a very disturbing issue. And the manner in which they did it also raised a problem. But let us also admit that over the years, many rogue elements have found their way into the national security. Yes. I mean, if you listen to the Emil Short Commission and the proceedings, there were some people who clearly shouldn't be near anywhere called national security, but they are in there. Our two major political parties have over the years made it a point to feed into state structures their foot soldiers, whether they qualify to be there or not. And so you are finding rogue elements in the national security who, whether they've been assigned officially or not, are capable of doing very dangerous things like they did to the fellows in modern Ghana.
What do you think has accounted for this? You said we had a honeymoon period. Why is the honeymoon over? I mean, you've just analyzed the trends. But I'm just curious about why this trend seems to be emerging, and non-state actors, state actors and non-state actors. Manasseh's case, we don't know,
Who
you know.
is-
I mean, in the past, people would ordinarily beat you up. I mean, but to go to the extent of threatening you with death,
Yeah.
carrying out one,
Yeah.
what's happening? What has changed in the national psyche? And then just to add to that, the Afrobarometer did some research, I think last year, that found that majority of people who they surveyed said journalists needed to be muzzled more.
Well, they don't trust journalists.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well,
What do you think is accounting for this?
that issue about the general public not trusting journalists is not exclusive to Ghana. There have been all kinds of, polls in places like the United States where respondents have seen journalists as liars compared to, let's say, the police or some other professions that have not been necessarily in the good books of the general public. Well, in our situation, again, we came from a period in the late 80s, early 90s, when the democratic space was opening up, where the public were quite enthralled by the media and were ready to support the media. I remember some years back, there was an attack on a fellow who went on air, and of course, unethically, accused Rollins of committing arson to his own house. If you remember
I
that
remember
story.
that,
Yes.
yeah.
Now, Rollins, by some means, as former head of state, got the police to go and arrest this guy. And there was quite an uproar, even from market women.
Yeah.
So not much came out of that. They were trying to use this old provision in the Public Order Act, causing, what do they call it? Fear and panic. Yes. Now, since then, the public attitudes to the journalists or the media have gone down, largely because when the politicians from the MPP and the NDC now got to invest in radio particularly, they've used it in ways that the public have seen as peddling lies and unedifying stuff. Remember that these two parties and the stations they have owned have been the most guilty of using language that is unedifying.
And Media Foundation did some research
Yeah,
on
we've
this
been
last election.
during elections and so on. And you find out that it is these two parties who have been making sure, or who have been working in ways that keep giving the media a bad name. Because they don't employ people who should be employed behind the microphone. They just employ people who can insult, who are trained by these parties also to insult. So all of that, the good citizens will not say Joy is good and so is not good. No, they will band the media together. So that is one, I believe that's the major source of the decline in public respect for the media. But that does not necessarily mean that that is why people go after journalists and will want to kill a journalist or will want to harm a journalist. I think that has to do with the fact that the press freedom we are talking about has now enabled journalists to go out there and dig out the dirt from powerful forces in the society. Investigative journalism has become very strong in this country, and these investigative journalists are really exposing things that the powerful people don't want to be exposed. Let us remember that, at least in Africa, in the last 20 or 30 years, from my own knowledge, experience around the continent, what we have experienced is that all the journalists who have been murdered, they have been murdered because they are doing the right thing.
Okay.
They are doing a good job. Norbert Zongo in Burkina Faso, he was murdered because he was exposing corruption and graft. And who killed him? It's been proven that the guy who engineered his murder was the brother of the overthrown president, Compaoré. In Nigeria, the same, under Babangida, a parcel bombing of an investigative journalist. In Mozambique, you can name it. It is always the journalists who are doing the right thing who suffer. Nobody goes to kill the journalist who is insulting people left and right. You see, because the journalist who is insulting, who is not doing good journalism, they don't threaten anybody. After all, if you insult me, it's just like the wind, just passes away. But if a Manasseh or an Anas or somebody else is trying to expose corruption, well, then he puts his life out there in danger, because the person is trying to expose is a criminal. And those types of people, corrupt people, people who are stealing from the state, they are just like armed robbers. If you try and catch them, they'll kill you. This is what we are facing now. Because again, you see that corruption has become so gargantuan. Yeah, and there are powerful forces behind corruption. Every day we get to hear stories to show that the politicians are in cahoots to steal money from this country, sometimes in cahoots with business people and so on. And those forces everywhere in the world are very dangerous. And therefore, they will not let journalists expose them. Now, Nana Akufo-Addo's problem of dealing with this situation may be that the political forces combined with the business elements who are really behind the big-time corruption and therefore who pose dangers to media that wants to expose these forces are perhaps more overwhelming than Akufo-Addo can deal with. That is why we are saying he should not, even if he's dealing with it, he shouldn't deal with it on the quiet. Okay. He should come out openly in the public and endorse press freedoms, say a word or two to protect, to support these journalists, so that he sends fear into all of those forces who might be trying to do those kinds of
Surprised that he hasn't spoken about it yet?
Well, let us say that a president does not just jump all the time to talk about something just when it has started. I suspect that sooner than later he will have to do that. Because you see, your organization is mounting this campaign, and you must continue. We also have another campaign by GIBA, the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association. That is equally important, because why? That campaign is dealing with one fundamental question about press freedom, namely media pluralism. Because what GIBA's campaign is about is saying that, listen, the National Communications Authority is doing something that will deprive ordinary viewers from watching television free on air. And I think that it is something that should be complimented, should be congratulated, and should be supported. So your two campaigns are very, very important. Now, your two campaigns must force government, must compel President Akufo-Addo to say, no, citizens, hold on. Let's stop and look at this issue. It's very, very important. You see, because if the president does not intervene as vigorously as he should, elections are coming, and you know that during elections, party activists attack journalists. And that kind of situation is likely to get worse. So we need a president to come out very boldly.
And strongly on this.
And strongly. We need John Mahama to come out boldly, not as a campaign issue, but as a commitment to press freedom. The two political parties and their leaders must all come out, not for any votes from the media or anything, but because they are responsible for governance in this country, or have been for the past 25 or so years.
I'm going to take a quick break, and when we return, Prof just touched on the National Communications Authority. I'll ask him his view on what Giba believes to be a systematic attempt by the NCA to roll back the broadcasting space in terms of the freedom that the broadcasting space enjoys. So we have a few policy initiatives that the NCA has introduced that the Giba is fighting. One, the reduction of the broadcast radius from 100 kilometers to 45 kilometers. We've talked about the NCA invading the premises of pro-opposition broadcast houses and shutting them down. In fact, as we speak, Radio Gold and XYZ are still off air. Is another one that we'll talk about. And that institution has executives appointed by the president directly. And so I'll ask Prof's opinion on that. And I'll ask him what others have said as part of this campaign, that all the assault on journalists and the threats to kill and actually as killing is creating a return to the culture of silence where journalists are now self-censoring. Before you write something, you are afraid, and so you are not as bold as before because you're afraid who might come at you. I'll ask his opinion on that, and then subsequently, we'll talk about our press freedom ranking that has dropped and what we can do to get back to the top. You're still live here on PM Express. My guest is still Professor Kwame Kaikari. And of course, we've been talking about defending media freedoms and his own thoughts on the subject. Just before the break, he had touched on a major part of this campaign, a campaign that already the Ghana Independent Broadcasters Association has taken part of this to court. Some of them they've lost, some of them they're still pushing with the NCA. Prof, recently, an incident occurred with NCA getting police support to storm a radio station, 2 radio stations to be very specific. Both radio stations we know are pro-opposition stations. They succeeded in shutting them down, and it's been months now. The 2 stations, Radio Gold and XYZ, are still off air. It's actually surprising to think that Radio Gold and XYZ are still off air, because of the shutdown. But NCA argues that they were pursuing a totally legal and legitimate cause because the courts were on their side.
Actually, the manner in which the NCA went about shutting down Radio Gold, particularly, was disgraceful. For a regulator that wants to shut down a radio station, to take armed police to the premises of a radio station and to sack its staff out of their offices and so on and shut it down is something that should not happen in this country, in the Fourth Republic. And you see, these are some of the things that we are saying amount to the recession of press freedom.
Okay.
First of all, if my memory serves me right, this is the first time in the Fourth Republic that radio stations have been shut down by that regulator.
I guess apart from Radio I.
Well, Radio I was there before NCA,
yes, that's true.
And
that's
really,
true.
Radio I was like the frontiersman.
Absolutely.
Fighting for the opening up.
It was through Radio I that we all started talking about NCA.
And again, it was under Rawlings' time, and we know Rawlings has never supported press freedom or human rights. So I don't. If Rawlings,
we don't want to count that as part of it.
No, if Rawlings' government imprisons journalists, it's in the natural order of his character and understanding of politics, but not under Akufo-Addo's government. You see, now the NCA says that they had a legal basis for doing that. Yes, they had a legal basis, but that argument is even flawed, because when we checked at the time when they closed down Radio Gold and a number of others, we found out that the basis upon which they said they were shutting down those stations, there were other radio stations, other entities that had also not paid up to that point. So it was clearly discriminatory. And therefore, all you can say is that then the NCA was doing that to shut down the opposition's voice. And that's unacceptable. If I don't like, of course I'm not in any position of power to say I don't like this or that and this must happen. There are some people who don't like the propaganda of Radio Gold. There are some people who also don't like the propaganda of the radio stations owned and operated by MPP activists or ministers or whatever. So, but in Ghana, for the NCA to go and close down a radio station, it's not right.
What should NCA have done when they believe that a breach of the law has occurred?
Then they should have closed down all of the radio stations that had breached that law. And that's why we are saying that there were radio stations which had not paid up, who were as guilty as the Radio Gold. But why didn't they shut them down? So there was a political motive, and that's not acceptable. If the law is to work in a democracy, it must work blindly. That it shouldn't favor anybody at all. But for a regulator to say that I'm shutting down this radio station, and again, at a moment when they were, from the point of view of the party, when they were making a major statement concerning something that was of interest to them and their supporters, that wasn't right.
The two stations are still off air. What should happen now?
The two stations are still off now. One thing is that if they owe, they must go and pay. And
NCA said they must reapply for a license because it's deemed as if they never had a license.
Well, if they must reapply, they should reapply.
NCA again says so that is that they reserve the right to scrutinize the license.
Yeah, they reserve the right, certainly.
And reject it if they deem they don't qualify.
Well, but then I don't know the law. But I'm saying that because those stations were shut down in a manner that actually showed discrimination, maybe they should take it up legally. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the merits this way or that way. But I'm saying that the NCA was wrong because it discriminated against those radio stations. And if, therefore, the NCA, they reapply and the NCA says that, listen, you reapplied, but we've given the frequency to somebody else, they should find out who they've given those frequencies to, and then whether or not those people are party affiliates to the ruling party, well, that becomes another story.
You have a good friend at the NCA who is a board chair and a good friend of all of us, my role model, Kweku Sechado, a man who was with you in the trenches, just like Donaldo, fighting against assault on press freedom, etc. But he's there, and then this has happened under his chairmanship. You think he should do something about it?
Well, he is in an institution whose members are appointed by the president. So I would assume that as chair also, he knew about these. So it's possible that he agrees with what is going on. If he does agree, it will be interesting to hear him, why he agrees with what is going on. I certainly don't agree with it, and I know so many people in the country who are not NDC members who simply want press freedom, media pluralism, and the independence and freedom of the media to go on as the Constitution says and as we all want. And so it will be interesting for him to tell us, what he thinks about what is going on. I don't know his views, so I don't want to speculate about it.
You think the president should intervene in that too?
I think that the owners of the radio station must appeal to the president. Yes, I think they should do that because he's the president for everybody. And let's see if they have merit. they should appeal to the president.
Another good friend of yours, Charles Rekubobe, the brain behind Radio I, had suggested that his biggest concern is that all the things you've cited quite eloquently that is happening in the media space that is receding press freedom could create a culture where people, journalists, writers, become self-censor. And he believed that's the biggest threat to democracy. When you're writing in the comfort of your room and you're second guessing yourself and afraid to put out your view and do your work as professionally as required because you're afraid of maybe the system coming after you or somebody shooting you on the street, and so you self-censor. Is that a concern of yours as well?
Of course. But you see, the people who attack journalists, the people who hound journalists, this is what they are aiming at. That journalists will stop doing what they are supposed to do, will stop exposing wrongdoing in society. They are not attacking the journalists to stop playing music or to stop broadcasting religious messages or to stop sports and so on. They are hounding journalists so that they should stop the investigative journalism going on, so that they should stop the documentaries people like your station do, which expose wrong things. You see, the problem we are talking about comes in many forms and from many sources. One of the problems in this Fourth Republic is activists, ministers, and so on of all of the political parties that have ruled us. Whenever they are in office, virtually all the ministers, all the people appointed by the government of the day, when you criticize anything, they automatically brand you as part of their opposition. Your own station was branded as opposition by John Mahama's administration.
They boycotted us for
They boycotted you, and now it is on the
switched,
other.
The MPP has also boycotted us into the
But I believe that if you face something like that, you must feel proud.
Okay.
That you are doing something while these political parties, both of whom are so choked with corruption, don't like you. So what Charles Rekubobe is saying is really the object of all the people who hate press freedom, so that journalists will stop telling the truth. The truth is what people fear. So that's what they are targeting. We should stop telling the truth. We should stop saying that the construction of dams under the one village, one dam is not as it ought to be. And you see, something like this, when a journalist in a radio station in Bolgatanga investigates and finds out that this brilliant idea, this most important project that goes to the heart of promoting agricultural development in the arid north, this thing that we believe Akufo-Addo is so sincere about, the people who are constructing it are cutting corners. So at the end of the day, they are subverting, they are undermining, they are sabotaging Akufo-Addo's major project in agriculture. And when a journalist is exposing this, government should be happy.
That doesn't appear to be the case.
The ministers hound them. They deny it, they come on radio, and then organizations like Media Foundation, which give monies to radio stations and so on to do documentaries, are accused of being in the opposition. You see, so you find out that you wonder whether our politicians really respect and are committed to the constitutional provision in Chapter 12 that obliges all media to keep government in check and to demand accountability of government to the governed.
You mentioned Chapter 12, and that's the chapter that creates the National Media Commission.
Yeah.
In fact, the primary object of the National Media Commission, according to the Constitution, the first line in there when it comes to its function, is to defend media freedom.
Yes.
That's its first primary objective. Is NMC doing that adequately for you?
The NMC is a complex, or the work of the NMC is quite complex. Of course, it's set up to protect press freedom. It's set up to protect journalists. It's set up to also promote, as the Constitution says,
standards.
High standards of journalism. Now, in doing this kind of work of protecting journalists, there are a number of things they have to do, protecting press freedom and so on. But the character of the NMC makes it weak. They don't have a certain, muscle to do certain things against the media. Now, for some of us, and I was a member of the first commission with Professor Kofi Kumado as chair, and with such luminary legal minds, democratically inclined persons like the late Peter Alajete and so on that commission, we decided at the time that yes, because press freedom is something we must enjoy, we don't think we should introduce any measures that, as people say, give teeth to the National Media Commission. To bite whom? Okay. We don't want a situation where a regulator is biting journalists left and right. Then why did we fight for this constitution?
Okay.
So the character of the National Media Commission as it is does not therefore have the muscle or the teeth to bite media. And I don't think it should. What should be happening is that there should be more what we call self-regulation on the part of the media. We see media, including your station, including stations like City FM, including stations like Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, some in Kumasi, some all over the country, which are very professional, which self-regulate. They make sure what they do conform to high standards of journalism. Now, therefore, the problems of the National Media Commission is how do they, beyond appealing to ethics, how do they manage the wrongdoings of all of those many media which are not set up for journalism but are set up for propaganda purposes. This is the problem we are having. You see, we have a political class in both the two major political parties who are not interested in these ideals of freedom. The majority, I believe, go into the politics for their pockets, for money. So these things we are talking about, it's not an issue for them. That is why they will set up radio stations or to insult. You know, I mean, there was a radio station set up to just insult Akufo-Addo as a candidate from morning to night for a whole year. And then on the other side, too, there are stations that do that to their opponents. You see, so the NMC cannot do much about that. Of course, occasionally, some of them slip, the courts grab them, and so on and so forth. So the NMC, in that sense, cannot do too much to control these errant media, because the politicians themselves, they know what they are doing. They are not set up for the fineries of journalism.
But can
what the problem of the National Media Commission is, I think, when they have the opportunity to come out with pronouncements that will strengthen and that will reinforce the independence and strength of journalists and journalism, I think they falter. Okay. Why am I saying this? There are two examples I want to give. One is the recent statement they came out in dealing with the complaints that were sent to them about Manasseh's work. I think the report they brought out is not a good report.
Okay.
I didn't expect the National Media Commission to come out with a report that is so wishy-washy, that does not direct journalism to any higher level. You know, I think they failed to stand firm. They failed to act based on the mandate the Constitution gives them, to start from the position that we are promoting higher journalistic standards. But what they did, I believe, pandered to the powers that be by coming out with a statement that virtually anybody I know does not respect, and wonders why the National Media Commission will do that.
It's an opportunity lost, you think?
Yeah, opportunity lost. In the end, in my reading of that document, they betrayed Manasseh and Joy FM. They betrayed them. They didn't protect them. You see, because the report they have brought out is so bad. Now, another one was also in the dismissal of the Director General of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. The Director General of the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation went to the courts to get the courts to act to punish people who do not pay television license. But it was not arbitrary. There is a law passed by Parliament. The Director General goes out to collect the money. Who wants to pay money? Nobody in any society wants to pay money.
There was a huge public backlash.
There was a huge public backlash. The government panicked.
Yeah.
And in the government's knee-jerk attitude, I believe, they ordered the National Media Commission to sack the man. I think the government panicked so badly, and the National Media Commission once again didn't stand firm. Why am I saying this is one thing that undermines media independence and freedom? The NMC knows that the National Media, the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation doesn't have money. It's on its knees. The TV license fee is a major source of funding for many public service broadcasting entities around the world. Yeah. So if you don't want them to collect the TV license fees, you should provide them with an alternative of funding that the state broadcaster. Now what is happening? Because GBC is so weak, the National Media Commission, government, and so on are allowing the GBC to crumble so that they'll parcel it up for the highest bidder, sell it off. You know, I think that's part of
the workers agenda. A few weeks ago actually demonstrated because their satellite channels were being auctioned off to private, and the workers had taken that up.
You see? So I think all of these are things that the National Media Commission should have firmly stood up and found ways of strengthening the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation rather than doing a political job of weakening that institution by depriving it of the funds. Yes, the public were up in arms. Who wants to pay taxes? Who wants to pay anything? Government too did not help by chickening out and not finding ways of getting the TV license collected, if not in the manner that they didn't like. But to say that the Director General should be dismissed, and he had been dismissed, nobody knew the grounds upon which he was dismissed because he was implementing a law. Now, having dismissed him, do you think the next Director General will want to collect the TV fee? He will not.
Although it's a law that must be enforced. Yes. It hasn't been repealed.
He will not, but it goes beyond that. Any Director General will panic if they are going to broadcast anything they consider sensitive for government. You see, even though it must be something worth the public's interest.
Professor Kaikra is still with me. When we return from this break, we will wrap up with his thoughts on, so what do we do to reverse the trend, the recession that he's described is happening when it comes to media freedom? And then the question about media responsibility. In fact, some have even suggested that we deserve what is happening. And because we've been totally unprofessional, we've allowed the politicians to divide our front, and we just are not good enough. And so what we are getting is exactly what we deserve. His thoughts on that, stay with us. You're still live on PM Express. My guest is Prof. Kwame Kaikari. Prof, very quickly, two quick issues. One, there's a group of people who think that the challenges you described that is beleveling the sector, the media industry, is deserved. And the journalists and media owners are not being responsible, and so the solution is stifle them, beat them up, anything to make sure that they are put in their rightful place.
Well, people who talk like that, I'm not sure they know what they are talking about when it comes to freedoms. They are telling us that, for instance, when the police see a male Ghanaian, and usually it is males, urinating somewhere outside of a urinary, they should just bundle him and put him in prison for 5 years. They are saying that, those same people are saying that if they say anything that government doesn't like, government should just arrest them and put them in prison. Or if they say anything anybody doesn't like, that person must take a cutlass and slash them. You see, I can understand the frustration of such people. But that frustration is real, because a lot of the media in the country tend not to be professional. But the point is that is why we fight for media pluralism. If I don't like this radio station, I switch on to the other one. If I don't like this television station, nobody compels me to watch it. You see, when it was only GTV and GBC radio, then you would say that, what am I going to do? Many people in those days switched on to, say, BBC, and I remember in the 80s and so on, those people who have had access would wait for, let's say, West Africa Magazine, because there you might find some news of interest. We are not there anymore. So those people who are saying that, I would say that, well, they may have a point about the poor practice of many of our media and journalists, but that's not to say that, therefore, anybody who doesn't do things that we don't like, they should be treated without lawlessly.
What do we do about this? What do we do about this problem that you so eloquently articulated?
I'm saying that there are some things we cannot do anything about in this context. One, I am saying that the majority, the overwhelming majority of the radio stations and newspapers who perpetuate the unprofessionalism that annoys so many citizens, they are owned by politicians, particularly from the NPP and the NDC. They have their freedom, as everybody else have their freedom to set up media as they want. Now, for as long as the politicians own media that is not meant for edifying knowledge and information, but meant for telling lies, propagating hate and lies and so on, we'll have this sentiment among the population. But I'm telling the people in the population that they should be discerning. They shouldn't read those newspapers that they consider unprofessional or bad. They shouldn't watch the TV stations that are not good for them, for their tastes. They should switch to something else. They should not band all journalists together, all radio, TV stations together, and say that, therefore, the national security, the NCA should go and close them down, you see. Otherwise, what else can we do? You see, the problem with democracy is that it takes the wise and the fool, the good and the bad. There are laws. If people cross the line, then the law will deal with them. What are the laws in journalism that the law can deal with a journalist about? They are clear. If you are libeled, you go to court. But if a journalist tells lies which are not libelous, which are not defamatory, but are lies of facts and fabrication and so on, there's not much you can do.
Yeah.
For instance, the people who are saying that, the social media now contains plenty of stuff that are dangerous, pornographic, bad, immoral, and so on and so forth. Will they say, therefore, that the government must ban the use of social media? They will say that. Yeah. You don't read those things, you don't look at those photographs, or you will not even get those pictures because you are not on a certain network. You know, so I think that that is why we must keep fighting for media pluralism, so that we can have choices.
Yeah, so you can also make your own choice.
Exactly.
Prof, thank you very much for joining me. Prof is the Dean of the School of Communication Studies here at Wisconsin University. He's also the board chair of the Graphic Group of Companies, and I'm grateful that you heard him. He has some very interesting thoughts. Join the campaign, #Defend Media Freedom. My name is Evans Smith. Enjoy the rest of your day.